I'm thrilled to have with us again Dr. Christian Körner from the University of Bern, who's been so generous to agree to come back on the History of Cyprus podcast. And it's always nice talking with Christian. Christian, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. It's always nice talking to you.
Thank you. I'm excited for this because, I'm familiar with this period in time, but there's so much that I mean, this is kind of the theme of the podcast. There's so much I don't know, and I rely on the experts to kind of help fill in the gaps. And the 5th century BCE in Cyprus is to me, it's a puzzle. Like, there's a lot of pieces that I know independently, but I haven't really got a solid narrative here. And I feel that you're the expert to talk to, and I'm excited for it. Thank you for accepting the invitation again.
Thank you very much. I think the 5th century is not only for you a little bit of a dark age. It's really, if you look at the written sources, it's we do not know much about Cyprus in the 5th century. Archaeological finds is another thing, but with the texts from antiquity, you do not have too many sources you can rely on if you want to speak about Cyprus in the 5th century, and you cannot establish really a narrative, I think.
Well, okay, so the years between the Cyprus Revolt and the accession of Evagoras I, those are the years that are somewhat shrouded. So what are the challenges for historians like yourself in piecing it together? Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that first.
Yes, the major problem for the reconstruction of any period of Cypriot history is also you have not many texts surviving that help understand these developments. For the 5th century, of course, we have Herodotus and Thucydides, two Greek historiographers from Athens. Thucydides being an Athenian, Herodotus at least living for some time in Athens. So you always have this Athenian perspective. And both have written works on the major 5th century conflicts, Herodotus on the Persian Wars, Thucydides on the Peloponnesian War, but these are events which do not really affect Cyprus. So Cyprus, of course, is only of minor interest for both of them. Herodotus at least delivers some information on this Cypriot Revolt, and Thucydides sometimes mentions Cyprus, but we have to rely on later sources. And there's one Greek historiographer from the 1st century BC, Diodorus of Sicily, and that's 400 years after the 5th century. So he also had to rely on older sources, which now are lost to us. He worked mainly with Evagoras. Evagoras was a historian from the 4th century, and we do not have his works, only a few fragments. And Diodorus obviously compiled many information from Evagoras, but Diodorus often confuses things. So it's really difficult to get to the real thing behind Diodorus. At least we have one famous text, I think we will talk about later, the bronze tablet of Idalion. That's one of the rare instances where you have a text from Cyprus itself, on Cyprus, on historical developments or events in Cyprus, but that's rather rare.
You mentioned that there's not a lot of, Cyprus isn't what they're writing about. It's not their focus. What other sort of problems do historians have to grapple with when working with, say, Thucydides, for example? I mean, do they have a particular perspective?
Yes, of course. So Thucydides is writing about the Peloponnesian War, and he's interested in the conflict between Athens and Sparta, and between the allies of Athens and the allies of Sparta. And Cyprus is not involved in the Peloponnesian War. So when he speaks about the causes and developments that led to the Peloponnesian War, sometimes Cyprus emerges in his text. And Herodotus, on the other hand, is concerned with a major conflict between Persia and Greece. That's his main interest. And he is, for us, the only source really close in time to the Cypriot Revolt, which on the one side is really wonderful because we have a narrative over a few pages, what was going on at 498 and 97 BC. in Cyprus. But on the other hand, having no other written text about this event makes this a little bit of a problem, because we do not know if Herodotus really knew what was going on. We do not even know if he ever was in Cyprus. He seems to have traveled a lot. He says at least that he was in Egypt, but we do not know if he was in Cyprus. So we have to rely on one source whose credibility is not always that clear. Another thing is, of course, archaeological finds from the 5th century. Archaeology is archaeologists are working a lot in Cyprus and finding a lot of things, but it's sometimes difficult to relate archaeological finds to written texts. So that's another challenge for research.
So for those not familiar with Cyprus in the 5th century, can you provide some historical context? For example, what the political makeup of the island was?
If you look at a map, you will see that Cyprus is much closer to Asia and to the Levant than to Greece. So it is no surprise that Cypriots always had to arrange themselves with the empires that existed in the Near East. First Assyria in the 8th and 7th centuries BC, then perhaps Babylonia, perhaps Egypt, and of course Persia from the late 6th century onward. Cyprus itself was divided into several small kingdoms. It was not a united great kingdom. Number of kingdoms varied over the centuries. It was about 10. And the kings of these little states often got into conflicts, especially over the important copper, which can be found in the large Troodos Mountains in the western part of the island. And this copper was also exported. So to keep commercial contacts to the Levant intact, the Cypriot kings had to arrange themselves with what was happening in the Near East, with the Near Eastern empires. In the late 6th century, they had submitted to the Persian great kings, and when the Persian king Cambyses started his attack on Egypt, Cyprus seems already to have been partly under Persian control. And so we can say at the latest, before 500, Cyprus must have arranged itself with Persia and accepted Persian supremacy.
Why would the Cypriot city kingdoms have submitted? And I know we talked about this in our previous interview, but it's worth revisiting, talking about the concept of suzerainty.
Yes, I think so too. I've established this concept in order to describe and explain the relations between these powerful great empires and the petty kings on the periphery, especially on Cyprus. These petty kings had or did submit to the great kings and had to provide certain services, such as paying tributes or delivering military support. And in return, they were able to keep a certain autonomy, especially in the interior. For example, they had the right to coin their own mints under Persian rule. And of course, they had access to the important markets in the Near East. For the great empires in the Near East, which had their centers in Mesopotamia or even further east, this proved to be a very efficient way to control the periphery. And when the Cypriot kings had to come to terms with the Assyrian Empire in the late 8th and early 7th centuries BC, these relationships seem to have been regulated in the form of treaties. And of course, these treaties never could cover all aspects. So therefore, there seems to have been a certain, I call this instability inherent in the relationship. You knew what you had to deliver, but you did not always know what you were not allowed to do else. So there seems to have been a certain potential of conflicts. But at least it provided a relationship which, from the Assyrian times until the late 4th century BC, when the Persian Empire collapsed, seems to have worked for both ways, with some conflicts, such as Cyprus Revolt or Cypriot War under Evagoras in the 4th century. But all in all, it seems to have been an efficient way for both sides.
What were the Cypriot kingdom's obligations in return?
Problem is, we do not have any written documents. There are some treaties between Assyria and other regions on the periphery, and we know of some texts that Cypriot kings had to deliver, for example, ivory and wood for a palace building in Nineveh, or they had to provide military support when Assyrians attacked Egypt. And most probably it was the same thing under Persian rule. We know that they had to pay tribute to the Persian great king. It seems that Darius restructured this tribute system, and they had to pay this tribute. And of course, they had to support Persia. We know there were Cypriot ships in the Persian fleet when the Persian wars against Athens started. So this seems to be very obvious. I do not think that there still existed treaties in Persian times such as they must have been in Assyrian times, but rather that the relationship was so clear that they were subjugated by the Persian king and had to obey their orders. But I think they had a large space of autonomy still left.
So, okay, in the 5th century, war breaks out between Greece and Persia, which inevitably thrusts Cyprus into conflict as well. I think we need to get a sense of the context here. So what are the roots, before we move on to Cyprus specifically, but what are the roots of the Greco-Persian conflicts?
The conflict started in Ionia, which is western coast of Asia Minor, now Turkey. And there were several Greek cities. Most famous are Ephesus, Milet. And these cities had come under Persian control in the late 6th century. The Ionian cities still had their own dynasts, such as Aristagoras of Milet. And now, around 500 BC, Aristagoras, together with the Persians, tried to attack the island of Naxos. This attack failed due to conflicts between Aristagoras and the Persian commander. And now Aristagoras was afraid that he would be punished. And he therefore managed to start a rebellion that affected several Greek cities in Ionia. So you can see the cause of the rebellion seems to have been a conflict between a local Greek dynasty and his Persian allies. But the dimension of the uprising, which affected whole Ionia, shows that there was a deep discontent with Persian rule, perhaps for tax reasons. And now Athens and Eretria supported the Ionian revolt. So when the Persian king Darius had suppressed the revolt, he and later his son Xerxes wanted to punish the Greek cities of the mainland for supporting the Ionians. After the Greek victories at Salamis and Plataea, the Athenians wanted to continue the war against Persia, and here comes Cyprus into focus. I think we will speak about that later on.
Obviously, given that Cyprus is part of the Persian Empire, like I mentioned a second ago, it's going to thrust Cyprus into this conflict as well. But it seems that at least with regards to Cyprus, Athens seems to be the aggressor, attacking Cyprus several times. So why was Cyprus such a focused interest for the Athenians, at least?
I think that's obviously a strategic importance. Cyprus is in the Eastern Mediterranean, and if you want to attack Persia, not only in the Aegean Sea but also further east, you have to have control over Cyprus. It's close to the southern coast of Asia Minor. It's close to the Levant, and Athens also intervenes in Egypt. Egypt is part of the Persian Empire, but tries several times to liberate itself. And the Athenians thought this a good opportunity to support Egyptian resistance against Persia. And to support Egypt, you needed to have this naval base at Cyprus.
A lot of this we had mentioned is based on Diodorus, and you had mentioned a second ago that his information, it is the most detailed, but obviously it's problematic because it's written so many centuries after the events in question. You also say it's contradictory too. In what way is Diodorus contradictory?
The problem is we have about 4 interventions, Athenian interventions in Cyprus, and Diodorus confuses at least the second and a third. So he mentions events, battles, and attaches them to the wrong intervention, or he mentions, he describes, not only mentions, even describes a naval battle or a victory at a river, which must have taken place at the southern coast of Asia Minor. And luckily, we have other sources like Thucydides or like Plutarch, which help us to see where Diodorus mixes things up. He has the longest account, so it's interesting to read his texts, but you have to take the elements apart and try to adjust them according to what Thucydides and Plutarch give us. So then you can use some of the material that Diodorus provides us with. We do not know if the problem is Diodorus or even his source Evagoras, I've mentioned earlier, already had this mix-up. And one should not forget that Diodorus writes a universal history. So his concept is to describe everything that has happened until his times. So Cyprus is only a very, very small part of his interests, and he's really not focused on Cyprus. He's a better historian, of course, for Sicily because he comes from Sicily, but Cyprus is not his main focus.
Yeah. Speaking of the four conflicts or interventions, these are conflicts that spanned approximately 4 decades, including the first one, which was a joint venture between the Spartans and the Athenians.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know anything about the nature of this first battle? I mean, it's so bizarre for me because never have I ever associated Sparta with Cyprus. I had no idea they were even a presence at one point.
Yes, it's it has to be seen in the context after the Persian Wars, after the Second Persian War, when Xerxes was defeated first in 480 in Salamis and in 479 in Plataea and Mycale. And then the question arose if the Greek cities in Ionia should be freed. And in the first period, very short probably, Sparta still was in command. It was Pausanias, the great victor from Plataea, who led these ships, and of course, fleet was partly Athenian. And obviously, they also went to Cyprus and freed Cyprus in the context of this, I would say, aftermath of the Second Persian War. But very soon after that intervention, Sparta withdrew from this concept of freeing Greek cities and tried to focus again on the Greek mainland, while Athens decided to continue the war against Persia, established the Naval League, the Delic League, as it is called, and continued the war for several decades. So this intervention by Pausanias, of course, supported by Athenians, is something of, you have to see it just in the aftermath when Sparta still was in this post-victory
euphoria, maybe?
Yeah, euphoria, yeah, thank you. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we know what happened after this conflict? Do we know anything?
Yeah. The strange thing is, or no, not strange, the problem for us is we also only have these little, I like to call it windows. Sometimes you have an information and you know about some intervention or conflict, and then again Cyprus disappears. That's what makes this 5th century so problematic for us. So we hear about Cyprus, I think, about 10 years later again, and then Athens intervenes again. So in the meantime, Cyprus obviously must have fallen back under Persian control, but we do not know how, why, when. So we only have these little windows which help us to see what happened in 470, what in 460, what in 450. Yeah.
And so it's around this time that we see the election of Kimon in Athens as strategos, right? And he's going to be a really important part of this conversation today. What do we know about Kimon? I mean, for those of you who are listening and may not be familiar with him, there's a statue of him in Larnaca in Cyprus, and he's important to Cyprus, and we'll get to that. But what's his background? What is his position of strategos, and what was he tasked to do?
Kimon was obviously one of the most influential politicians in democratic Athens. He was the son of Diodorus, the victor of the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. And in the 470s and 460s, Kimon was strategos, which is a military commander in the Athenian democracy. The strategos was elected by the Athenian citizens for a year. And obviously, Kimon was re-elected several times. And these strategoi, there were always 10, had to lead the campaigns, and the decision about war and peace was in the hands of the Athenian assembly of all the citizens. But strategic decisions, of course, were taken then by the strategoi. And as Kimon also was, of course, an Athenian citizen, he was also a member of the Athenian assembly. And coming from a very respected family, probably highly trained also in rhetorics, he also had probably influence in the discussions in the assembly. So when there was a debate about going to war, Kimon obviously had influence in the assembly. In the 450s, his career suffered a severe break when he was ostracized, since the Athenians thought he was too close to Sparta. But in 451, he returned and then started again an intervention in Cyprus. So he's, in the years between 480 and 450, probably one of the most important Athenian politicians. He seems to have come from a rather aristocratic background. Also, he managed to get along fine in the democracy, but his exile obviously also had something to do with the conflicts between the group who wanted to establish the democracy even stronger around Ephialtes and Pericles. And Kimon, on the other hand, seems to have been rather conservative, as far as we know, and that might have been one of the reasons behind his exile, behind his ostracization.
Kimon, he's involved in the fourth conflict in Cyprus, which will lead to his death. But before we get to that, do we know anything about the second and third conflicts before we talk?
He's already Kimon's already part of the second intervention. The second intervention probably happened in 470 under his leadership, and he was able to defeat the Persians at the river Eurymedon and southern Asia Minor. It looks like as if the main conflicts, the main battles were not in Cyprus but in southern Asia Minor. But in order to fight there, Kimon, of course, had to establish a firm base in Cyprus, and it looks as he had already freed Cyprus again. But the problem is that Diodorus' account is here very confused, but Plutarch gives us a rather trustworthy account of this second intervention. And the third intervention seems to have taken place again 10 years later, so in 460 BC. And here we have an interesting Athenian inscription dedicated to the fallen citizen and mentioning Cyprus as one of the areas where these citizens were fallen in battle. So we can also date this inscription really exactly to 460, 459 BC. And also we have Plutarch and Thucydides, and it looks as if this third intervention seems to have been part of a larger enterprise to support one of the revolts in Egypt. We do not know, we do not hear of Kimon in this third intervention, but it looks as if he was already in exile. So then, of course, he would not have been part of this intervention.
Yeah. Before we talk about the fourth conflict, I know listeners are probably wondering and waiting for me to ask this question. how do we characterize the Cypriot position during this conflict? Today, you go to Larnaca, you see the bust of Kimon now, and we can infer that he holds a special place in the place and in the minds and the hearts of modern Cypriots. But then where did they stand?
That is really difficult to assess because the sources do not give us any names of Cypriot kings. They do not even mention Cypriot kingdoms, except for the fourth intervention we will talk about later, I think. So we do not know what the role of the Cypriot kings in all this was. Of course, this can be a problem of the sources. We have already said Diodorus, universal history. Cyprus is not really his focus. Plutarch writes a biography about Kimon, so he's really interested in Kimon, but not interested in Cyprus. And Thucydides also has this Athenian perspective. So it may be a problem of the sources. It may also be that the Cypriot kings really only were, you could say, maybe objects of this conflicts, which was between Athens and Persia. So they do not seem to have made really taken initiative as they do in the 4th century or as they do in the early 5th century with the Cyprus Revolt. So I tend to believe that it's not only a problem of the sources, but that really Cyprus is not an active protagonist in these conflicts.
It's interesting that you should say that because it's such a stark contrast between the more active and assertive policies of Evagoras during his reign. What factors do you feel may have enabled this shift between a more independent and influential Cypriot foreign policy later on and this more passive role that the Cypriot kings have?
It was really interesting to see this question. I have thought a lot about it in the last days. And interestingly, I first came to an explanation which may be a little bit problematic. I think maybe it's personality of Evagoras. That's problematic because we do not know much about Evagoras, but all the actions that we know that he's taken, are really daring, or he seems to be extremely versatile, a gifted politician who was able to make intrigues with Persian satraps. He is able to gain support by Egyptian pharaohs. He manages to escape through a blockade of his city. So I think that he obviously was a really strong personality. And we should not forget that he had the luck to reign about at least 30 years. So he had really a long time to make a strong impact. And luckily, we have one interesting contemporary source, which is Isocrates. Isocrates was an Athenian orator who obviously knew Evagoras. And after Evagoras' death, he wrote a speech in praise of Evagoras. Of course, a speech in praise is not an objective source. The aim is to praise the dead king. But at least he delivers us some contemporary, what could you say, facts which could not have been invented, since people living then could have said, this did not happen. And according to Isocrates, Evagoras managed to start several measures to stabilize the economic and strategic situation of Salamis. And before his great conflict with Persia, the Cypriot War from 390 to 380 BC, Evagoras was ruling for 20 years without problems. So he really had 2 decades to implement his reforms, his measures, and to establish a really strong position for Salamis, doing rearmament and so on. I think we really could see some of the reasons in the personality of Evagoras. And on the other side, Persia always has problems within their dynasties. So for some time, it may also be that the Persians are confronted with other conflicts. You have the Spartan intervention, which Xenophon of Athens writes about, the famous Anabasis. So obviously, in the shadow of these conflicts, Evagoras was able to regain the power for Salamis.
I like to think that too.
Mhm.
I don't know, out of all the historical figures that I've covered on the History of Cyprus podcast, I have a soft spot for the King of
Yeah,
Evagoras first.
yeah. I think I would add something. It's really fascinating. He loses the Cypriot War, and then Persia starts negotiations and demands that he should sign a treaty in which he accepts the formula that he will obey as a slave to a master. And Evagoras says, "No, I do not accept this," and is able to negotiate a peace treaty in which he has to obey as a king to a king, and this after he has lost the war. That really is fascinating. So he must have been a really good politician and a daring personality, I think.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's go back to the 5th century here. Let's go back to the fourth conflict. Kimon attacks a number of Cypriot cities. So what really happens in the fourth conflict?
So Kimon comes back to Athens, and obviously Athens again decides to support another Egyptian revolt by a man named Amyrtaios, and then they again decide that they have to take control of Cyprus. And Kimon sailed to Cyprus and first landed in the northwest of the island, attacking the city of Marion, and then he seems to have sailed to the south coast, where he besieges Kition. And according to Kimon's biographer Plutarch, he dies in Kition during the siege from a disease. According to Diodorus, there were a lot of other actions going on, which are a little bit more difficult to assess in their authenticity. Perhaps he also tried to besiege Salamis, which seems then to have been a stronghold of Persia. Perhaps he even had conflicts outside of Cyprus, but at least we know that he died in Kition. That is why the bust is now in Larnaca being the modern name of Kition.
There's a treaty that's signed. The Athenians leave Cyprus. Do we know anything about the terms of the treaty and why finally, Athens says, "All right, we've had enough"?
This peace treaty is really debated topic in ancient history. It's the so-called Peace of Kallias. Kallias being the negotiator on the part of Athens. I think it's not clear whether there really was a treaty in the strict sense of the term, but there seems to have been an understanding between Athens and Persia to cease hostilities and to define spheres of influence. And obviously, Cyprus was in the sphere of influence of Persia. So we do not hear of any Athenian intervention after 449 BC. So there seems to have been, at least, it seems to have been clear for both sides that this part of the East Mediterranean was a sphere of influence of Persia.
So let's talk about the bronze tablet of Idalion. It's significant for a number of reasons, but I mean, let's talk about it in the context of Cypriot history in the 5th century. What is it, and what do we know about it?
It's a really, really fascinating document. It was found in the 19th century by a local in the village of Dali, I think about 20 kilometers from Nicosia. And Dali is ancient Idalion, hence bronze tablet of Idalion. The tablet contains a very long inscription in the local syllabary. The Greeks in Cyprus were at the time mainly writing in this local syllabary and not in the Greek alphabet. And in this inscription, the king of Idalion, Stasikipros, and his polis recompensate a doctor and his brothers for the medical help during a siege. This doctor, Onasilos, receives a plot of land, which is really clearly defined where it is, for his services. And the tablet was set up in the sanctuary of Athena in Idalion. And this inscription is of great importance for a number of questions, such as legal issues. You can learn about the topography of the ancient kingdom of Idalion. And for our topic, it is very, very interesting since it mentions an attack of Kytians and Medes against Idalion. Kytians are the people from Kition, and Medes is another word for Persians. So there we know that one Cypriot state, Kition, gained obviously support by the Persians to attack another city-state, Idalion. The problem is that the date of the tablet is unclear and is very often debated topic in Cypriot history, but it most probably has to be dated in the first half of the 5th century BC. It's interesting that the Medes are first mentioned. It's Medes and Kytians, not Kytians and Medes. I think it's because obviously the Persians are the stronger force. They have a large empire. They are the more powerful enemy. And perhaps one might speculate whether there were still anti-Persian feelings in Cyprus after the failed Cypriot Revolt. Feelings which the king Stasikytos of Idalion was trying to satisfy when he wrote the text as it is written. So that's maybe a reason why the Medes are mentioned first. The interest behind the attack on Idalion seems clearly to have been a Kytian interest. Kition obviously was trying to expand his influence to the interior of the island. Kition is a coastal kingdom. It's modern Larnaca, which is at the Bay of Larnaca. And Idalion, on the other side, was an inland kingdom close to very important copper deposits. So it looks as if Kition was trying to get hold of these copper deposits. And later on, Kition was able to annex Idalion after this siege. And we know that because later kings of Kition bear the title King of Kition and Idalion, which means they had obviously succeeded in annexing Idalion.
What's the relationship between Kition and Persia? I mean, why would Persia support Kition in attacking another city kingdom? I mean, there's a part of me that's thinking, maybe Idalion was sympathetic to other powers at the time. I mean, I don't know. What's your take?
We had a very interesting conference in autumn 2022 in Larnaca on the role of Kition in the whole period we are now looking at. It was organized by Theodoros Mavroyannis and Christina Ioannou. It was really wonderful. And I had there a paper, which I hope will soon be published, where I had titled it, Kition, Persia's most loyal ally in Cyprus. I think that Kition, together with Amatus, really had realized that if you counted on the Persian card, you were able, with the backup of the Persian king, to expand your kingdom on the island. And for the Persian king, I think it might have been a way of controlling the island. It's the policy of divide and rule. You have these conflicts between the kingdoms since archaic times, and you make use of these conflicts by supporting one against another. You have with Kition and probably Amatus very loyal supporters who, in critical situations, are to be counted on for Persia. It's very obvious. In Amatus is the one kingdom I've already said that supports Persia in the Cypriot Revolt. And in the Cypriot War of Evagoras in the 4th century, it's Kition together with Amatus and Soloi, which call Artaxerxes, the Persian great king, for help against Evagoras. So they seem to have been like watchdogs or something like that on the island.
It's about self-preservation, political survival, and the economic benefits that comes along with that. Am I wrong in saying that, or is that ultimately kind of what describes the motivations of these city kingdoms in the period?
I think you're right with that. You can also see that with Evagoras. You have earlier talked about Pan-Hellenism, and according to Isocrates, Evagoras really supported Pan-Hellenism. He even became citizen in Athens, which is also confirmed by an inscription from Athens. But on the other side, all that Evagoras does is follow his Salaminian interests. So I do not think that the cultural affiliation or something like that plays a major role in their decisions. It's really about getting control of resources, getting control of trade routes, expanding your own kingdom. And if the, for example, Pan-Hellenic card plays, you play it. And if you let yourself be supported by Persia, then you set on the Persian card.
At the start of this, Christian, we talked about the sources and the limitations of Athenian and later Roman sources in reconstructing this period in Cypriot history. In your opinion, what are the most promising avenues for future research to gain a more balanced understanding of Cyprus's political landscape during this period?
I think archaeological research on Cyprus is extremely important, and there are many archaeologists working in the field, such as, of course, Maria Iacovu. I think you already interviewed her, or Anna Satraki from Cyprus, Sabine Fourier, Thierry Petit, Stefan Schmid, to mention just a few. And archaeological research is making really, really great progress. For example, the excavations of the Palace of Idalion. And when we are able to combine their discoveries and research with the historical texts, then we can throw further light at these developments. Therefore, it is very important that archaeology and historical sciences work really closely together, which is already happening, of course. I think there is really a chance to get more knowledge about Cyprus in this period.
Christian, another fantastic episode. If at the start of this recording I said the 5th century was a little confusing for me, you really helped kind of make this a more understandable period. And I thank you for that, Christian.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoy always talking to you because it helps me getting things clear in my head. If I have to also think about your questions, and no, I really enjoy it. So I'm looking forward to our next conversation.